Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the channel AI Era, Islamic Abrahamic Wisdom. Okay, let's unpack this. We often talk about economics in terms of GDP, interest rates, regulatory oversight. It's all about maximizing efficiency. But what happens when the entire framework, the very foundation of an economy, is built first on moral integrity, on absolute transparency? Today, we're doing a deep dive into the economic governance model established by the first caliph, Hazrat Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and we're pulling our insights from Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir's book, Hazrat Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So our mission here is to really extract the core principles of this state's economy. And we're not looking at it as just, a historical artifact. We're seeing it as a potential blueprint, a system where finance wasn't this cold mechanical thing, but a moral mandate. It linked prosperity directly to justice.
And what's absolutely fundamental for you to grasp right from the start is the context. This model gives us a really radical premise. It's the idea that financial justice and social justice are, well, they're completely inseparable. The whole point of economic governance was framed as faith in action.
Mm-hmm.
So the standards they set were designed to make sure that the material well-being of every single person was managed with the same seriousness as their spiritual well-being. It just elevates market behavior from a simple transaction to, a major ethical concern.
That distinction really sets the stage perfectly, because here's where we challenge a core modern assumption. Abu Bakr, he did not see the economy as like a neutral system, just reacting to supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
For him, neutrality just wasn't an option.
Precisely. Because human action, commercial action, is never neutral. The foundational view from the sources is that the economy was treated as a moral ecosystem.
A moral ecosystem.
Yes, and that just changes everything. Wealth wasn't just capital you pile up. It was explicitly defined as a trust from Allah. A trust. So the markets, they weren't just places for exchange. They were arenas of accountability. Exploitation wasn't just bad business. It was a betrayal of that divine trust.
And if wealth is a trust, then what you do in business is immediately tied to your spiritual state. The source points to this powerful principle that Abu Bakr constantly reinforced. Truthful merchants are partners of the righteous. I mean, that's more than just a nice slogan, isn't it?
What's fascinating here is how that idea, that philosophy, translates directly into legal consequence. If honest trade is a form of worship, then what is dishonest trade? It's not just a commercial misstep. It becomes a profound moral and spiritual failure. And that means wealth earned that way is automatically illegitimate. So the state could easily seize it or punish the offender because the act itself was corrupt at its very root.
Okay, so that ethical mandate, it must have led to some incredibly strict regulations. It's easy to talk about morality in the abstract, but how did they balance that? I mean, how did they maintain this strict moral oversight without just, stifling all entrepreneurial activity?
That is the key nuance. The market was free, but it was freedom within defined moral boundaries. The strictness really applied to acts of dishonesty, the things that destroy public trust. And this brings us right to our second section. The absolute zero-tolerance red lines they drew in the marketplace.
So if the whole system runs on trust, what were the specific acts they saw as a betrayal? What got the zero-tolerance treatment?
The focus was on anything that leveraged power or inside information to exploit someone's vulnerability. So an absolute rejection of hoarding essential goods to manipulate prices. It meant zero tolerance for fraud, which included everything from false weights and measures to, any dishonest trade practice. And crucially, misusing public funds, embezzlement, kickbacks, it was all in the same category of unforgivable economic sin.
The severity of the response described in the sources, it suggests this was treated way more seriously than, say, modern white-collar crime. If we connect this to the bigger picture, why was corruption seen as a moral crime, not just a technical offense?
Because the crime wasn't just against the treasury. It was defined as a violation of trust with Allah and with society. It's a violation of the social contract. You see, in a system where the government's entire legitimacy rests on delivering justice, economic corruption just shatters that foundation. They weren't just worried about lost revenue, they were terrified of destroying public faith.
That makes perfect sense. If you cheat in a trade, you're not just cheating one person, you're undermining the entire ethos of the system. But let's clarify the balance here. The sources are clear that this wasn't central planning. Markets were still free.
Absolutely. The goal was a level playing field, not production quotas. Abu Bakr strictly forbade price manipulation, creating artificial shortages, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He also banned monopolistic behavior that would crush smaller merchants. This is where you get that famous principle. Freedom without morality becomes oppression. The underlying idea was that markets exist to serve people, to protect their dignity and meet their needs, not to empower a few elites. You were free to compete, but never, ever free to exploit.
And a huge part of this, which the source stresses, is that this justice was blind to wealth, the idea of economic equality before the law.
That's the cornerstone of the whole system's integrity. The sources make it so clear that power and status bought you zero exemption from economic law. If an affluent, influential merchant committed fraud, they were held accountable just like anyone else, no exceptions. And that set an incredibly powerful precedent. It proved to the public that the system itself was incorruptible.
Okay, so let's pivot to the welfare mechanisms. If the market is morally constrained, what safety nets were in place to ensure stability and protect the most vulnerable?
Well, protecting the poor was just non-negotiable. It was baked directly into policy, all to reinforce human dignity. This meant concrete measures to ensure essential goods were always accessible. They would actively use policy levers to stop the poor from being crushed by inflation. Traders were legally forbidden from capitalizing on desperation, like during a drought or a famine. Economic policy had to have a positive social outcome. That was the mandate.
And the main tool for this stabilization was the Beit al-Mal, the public treasury. We tend to think of a treasury as just a big bank account, but how did it actually function as a stabilizer in practice?
It was so much more dynamic than that. First, it was the central anti-poverty tool, the main welfare safety net giving direct aid. Second, and this is so important, it was a mechanism for liquidity during crises, not just disasters, but, economic downturns. And of course, it funded public works and defense, but the governance was incredibly strict. Public funds were only ever used for the public interest. Never for prestige projects, never for personal enrichment of the ruling class.
That focus on redistribution, that brings us to maybe the most famous part of this model, zakat enforcement. This wasn't just passive charity, was it?
Not at all. It was fundamental to the state's financial balance. And its economic application was, well, revolutionary. Zakat was mandatory, and it served three huge economic goals. One, it prevented wealth from concentrating in just a few hands. Two, it forced the continuous circulation of money back into the community. And three, it directly reduced inequality by strengthening the purchasing power of the poor. It was like a mandatory systemic liquidity injection right into the lower economic strata.
And that leads to the critical question. What did the enforcement actually look like? If someone refused, was it an immediate, harsh response?
The enforcement really shows the seriousness of the commitment. You had designated collectors and auditors. If someone refused, seeing it as just optional charity, it was escalated. But the consequence was severe because refusing to pay zakat was treated as economic rebellion.
Rebellion, not just tax evasion.
Exactly. It was a direct challenge to the state's foundation. It sent this undeniable message that your social contribution was fundamental to the survival and stability of the entire moral economy.
Of course, the integrity of a system like this, it all rests on the leader. And that brings us to leadership integrity and the standard set by Abu Bakr. It was truly extraordinary.
It's the absolute requirement. If the leader is compromised, the whole moral ecosystem just collapses instantly. The source details his profound personal integrity. He refused any kind of personal enrichment. He accepted only a minimal allowance, just enough to live, not to accumulate. And he actively, meticulously avoided any conflict of interest.
And there's that stunning story about what he did on his deathbed. It's the ultimate illustration of his commitment, isn't it?
It is perhaps the most defining act of his leadership. Before he died, he calculated the total value of everything he had taken from the state during his service, every bit of allowance, any goods. And then he commanded that his own personal wealth be used to return that exact amount back to the state treasury.
Just imagine that. Imagine a modern leader, a CEO, anyone, publicly accounting for every penny and returning it. That act just sets an unforgettable standard.
It does. The message was unmistakable. When the leader is economically clean, the system resists corruption. That cultural standard he set was probably more effective than any single regulation.
And this wasn't just about his own personal morality. It was about establishing a clear, long-term economic vision.
That's right. They systematically prioritized stability over rapid gain. They chose sustainability over speculation. The goal was ethical commerce that would last, not just maximizing short-term growth figures. The core belief was that real economic strength comes from trust, from fairness and discipline, not from exploitation.
So let's bring this forward. What does this 7th century model mean for us today? I mean, we're dealing with economies driven by algorithms, high-frequency trading, and massive digital wealth concentration. The gap seems huge.
The relevance is profound because the ethical problem has just moved to a new platform. If you see wealth and the data that generates wealth as a trust, then this model demands that today we build ethical fintech systems. It demands transparent digital transactions.
Right, let's connect the dots. In the 7th century, they banned false weights and measures. What is the modern digital equivalent of a false weight?
It's the biased algorithm, the opaque algorithm. If an algorithm uses your data, the modern scale, to unfairly hike prices for you when you're desperate, say during a crisis, that is functionally identical to the exploitation and hoarding that they banned. The model requires us to prevent this kind of data-driven exploitation. It demands fair AI pricing algorithms.
So the old prohibition on monopolistic behavior, that must apply to today's tech giants.
Absolutely. The model would demand protection against digital monopolies, against using a platform's power to unfairly crush competitors. The core lesson is timeless. Technology must serve justice. It can't be used to create new, untouchable ways to exploit people.
This whole deep dive, it really boils down to one final point from the source, which feels like a direct warning to our globally connected but often morally fractured markets.
It is the ultimate lesson, isn't it? An economy without ethics may grow, but it will never be just. And, maybe more importantly, it will never be stable. Growth that's built on exploitation is inherently fragile because it destroys the social trust that holds the society together.
That's incredibly powerful. For you, the listener, the key takeaways today are pretty clear. The economy should be seen as a moral ecosystem. Zero tolerance for corruption has to start at the very top. And in our world, technology has to be guided by fairness, not just profitability.
And I'd really encourage you to explore the sources on this, especially the accounts of how the Beit al-Mal was managed. You can see how these high moral standards translated into complex, day-to-day administrative practice.
Excellent advice. And I'll leave you with one final thought to consider. How would our modern regulatory bodies, from financial authorities to consumer protection agencies, how would they change if they were mandated to treat every act of corruption not as a technical offense, but as a violation of trust with society? Just think about how that shift in definition might impact public confidence and genuine long-term economic stability. That's it for this deep dive. If you found this valuable, please subscribe to our channel and like the video. And also, please share this video with your friends. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.